Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with an army guide for Grand Cathay and Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. I've talked about the various units that Grand Cathay does have available and where I rank them from a campaign perspective, but let's talk about the army compositions and the kind of choices you do have available as them. This is generally the kind of army you will be using in the early game, a combination of Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen. Now, the reason for using these two units and focusing on getting these two units is because of two factors. One, they're pretty effective in combat early on in a campaign. Like, you look at Jade Warriors, they have a fair amount of armor, leadership, and pretty decent melee stats. They're not going to necessarily do exceptionally well from the perspective of doing damage, but they are going to be able to hold the line in a fairly good faction. Now, I'm not necessarily fond of formation attack because it does tend to reduce their damage dealing capability, and that's something that these guys can struggle with. Like, when you look at their weapon strength and melee attack, it's not necessarily the best in the world, unless of course you have balanced harmony with Yin. So a combination of units is, generally speaking, the way to go if you're playing as Cathay. So you get leadership, melee defense, melee attack, and that will help you out quite a bit. On top of that, if your units are now moving, you also can get extra armor and charge resistance. This is one of the things that makes Jade Warriors such really good early game units, is because they are capable of withstanding pretty much anything that can be thrown against you in the early game. And then we have Jade Warrior Crossbowmen. With the exception of Yanbo's campaign, where you might struggle a bit in getting these guys, you are definitely going to be able to recruit a lot of these Jade Warrior Crossbowmen very early on. Their range is 160, which is pretty good, and you can increase this even further with Gate Guards. Again, high level of armor, high level of leadership, that makes these guys exceptional. And it's not just a question of their combat capability, it's also the fact that they tend to do pretty well in auto-resolve, both of these units, because of the high level of leadership and, more importantly, armor. Of course, Jade Warrior Crossbowmen do benefit quite a lot from having a front line of Jade Warriors, but they are quite effective at dealing a lot of damage against opponents. They don't have a huge amount of armor piercing, but they do have a bit, and that is going to be useful when dealing with certain enemies. But really, just the fact that they have that range, that good amount of ammunition as well, does help them out. And don't forget the battle harmony in, speed, reload, skill, leadership, if you're in range of a Yang unit. Now, the discussion, I think, is with regards to Peasant Long Spearmen and Peasant Archers. So one of the benefits of Peasants is that they're expendable, so they won't affect the leadership of non-Peasant units that are nearby. You also have Charge Reflection and Expert Charge Defense with them. But when you consider these guys compared to Jade Warriors, the only situation where I would say there's any kind of real use for them is if you're dealing with a bunch of large, and when you look at Cathay campaigns, you're dealing with Skaven, you're dealing with Chaos Dwarves, you're dealing with Chaos Warriors, like maybe Hounds to some extent, but even then a fairly limited amount. Essentially what I'm trying to say here is there's not necessarily a lot of value proposition in terms of using Peasant Long Spearmen pretty much ever in a campaign. They are cheap, undeniably so, but so are Jade Warriors, and massing a lot of forces, like one of the main limiting factors in a Cathay campaign, is actually not necessarily recruiting a bunch of units. It's more so just having those recruitment slots. I mean, you can argue that, well, you don't need a barracks to recruit peasant long spearmen, but when you look at these units, the comparison side by side, you look at units like Peasant Long Spearmen have less in terms of overall stats. They do have a bit more HP because there's more entities, but yeah, the stats, I think, speak for themselves. Like, far less armor, less leadership, less melee attack with these units, less melee defense. weapon strength is roughly similar, but yeah, I just don't necessarily see a value. Peasant archers, bit of a different discussion, I would dare say. These guys do not require a tier 2 barracks, so you can recruit them tier 1. And the benefit here is you can just mass them. Like, if you're going to recruit any kind of tier 1 peasant unit, I would definitely go for peasant archers. But even then, when you're looking at Bashiva, when you're looking at Miao Yings, Yao Ming, you're going to be able to get Jade Warrior crossbowmen very, very quickly. General-wise, I'd recommend the Celestial General early on as one of your first army leaders, beyond, of course, your Legendary Lord. Bashiva is a bit of a discussion on that subject, but even then, the benefit of the Celestial General is that he's quite very strong in combat. He does a lot of damage, he has a good amount of durability, and he has a bunch of flexibility on the battlefield with his mount choices. But just having a good duelist lord is actually something quite useful for Grand Cathay early on in their campaign, because they don't have heroes or units that are quite good against, enemy lords, enemy heroes. I mean, obviously you can kill things with crossbowmen and peasant archers, but when we're thinking about like just going up toe-to-toe in melee, that's where the Celestial General shines, at least early on in a campaign. Later on, it's a different discussion on what kind of lords you want to focus on, but early on, I would definitely recommend the Celestial General as the second leader, second general you get beyond your Legendary Lord. Now, a bit later on in the campaign, you of course are going to increase your variety even with tier 2. So early on, so the army I showed earlier is the kind of thing you would recruit very quickly in your campaign. But a couple of turns in, you will obviously have a bigger variety of units, especially with the release of the Tiger Warriors you'll see. So you still want to use Jade Warriors, you'll still have Jade Warriors, but there is a value proposition, a significant one, in terms of recruiting Tiger Warriors in your campaign. When we look at Tiger Warriors, yes, they have lower armor, but they are so ridiculously good in terms of dealing with early game foes in a campaign, it's not even funny. I mean, when we see the stats, right, they have very good leadership, pretty good speed for an infantry unit, very good melee attack when we compared, especially when compared to Jade Warriors. So Jade Warriors are your frontline holders, whereas Tiger Warriors are the ones that can deal with chaff, especially as they do have those dual weapon capability available to them. Now, they don't have the Harmony system, but instead they get Ferocious Ambush. So they get Devastating Flank or Charge Speed, Charge Bonus, and just general speed with a 90-second cooldown, right? So 20-second duration, 90-second cooldown if the unit is charging. And that makes them very good at engaging the enemy in battle, and they can outrun quite a few enemy infantry units in the early game. Engaging the enemy in battle, doing flanking maneuvers, that is where their main value proposition comes in. And of course, they have that bonus versus infantry, which means that they're going to do quite well against most early game opponents. The main downside, if you will, for Tiger Warriors with dual axes is the recruitment cost, but you realistically can afford a bunch of things as Cathay. Cathay can get a lot of money very quickly, largely because of the battles you're going to fight, like Skaven in particular give you a truckload of money. Then we have the discussion of Iron Hail Gunners and Nangang Grenadiers, which you can recruit pretty quickly in a campaign as well. Now, here's my perspective on the subject of Nangang Grenadiers. They're very limited in terms of their use case capability in a battle. They can do a decent amount of damage against an opponent, but due to their limited range, they're going, and also the fact that the enemy will close in gaps. And keep in mind, you're talking about Skaven, you're talking about ogres, you might be talking about lizardmen, chaos. They're gonna find ways to close the gap. And from my perspective, Nangang Grenadiers are more useful as a unit to do kind of sustained damage, or, you know, debuff the enemy with their Heaven's Flash ability, which reduces melee defense and melee attack. But most of the time, I just don't, I find them incredibly situational. A more useful unit, to some extent, are the Iron Hail Gunners. They actually have more range than the Nangao Grenadiers, and they also do a bunch of armor-piercing missile damage. They are basically using shotguns in, you know, in melee, but or in close to melee range. I would say that blunderbusses of Chaos Dwarves are just significantly better as a unit, but they operate on the same principle. If something gets in close, something closes the gap, they can do a lot of burst damage to the enemy, especially if, you know, you form a formation like this where you just leave a gap for them to actually fire, and then you intercept any enemy unit that's trying to go through that gap with another one of your melee units. But all the same, consider the situation. Most of the time I think it's just not necessarily worth it to get the building, because you have to discuss, consider the questions like, is it worth it to get the building that gives you Nangao Grenadiers and Iron Hail Gunners, or is it worth it to focus more on just getting more Jade Warrior Crossbowmen and, you know, Tiger Warriors even? And from my perspective, most of the time, it's just better to get Tiger Warriors, or just get Jade Warrior Crossbowmen if you don't own the Tiger Warrior DLC. Like, that's where I stand with regards to Iron Hail Gunners. Not a bad unit, it's just a question of buildings, you know, building slots. If we had more building slots in the game in general, then yes, I would probably argue more in favor of Iron Hail Gunners, but as things stand, I just don't think it's worth that sacrifice to make, at least until we start talking about the artillery building, because obviously, you know, you're talking about Iron Hail Gunners being gained from the artillery building. Now, for a mid-game Cathayan army, you do actually have choices of what to use. You can, of course, keep using your Jade Warriors and your Jade Warrior Crossbowmen, but if you're recruiting a new army, or looking to supplement your existing ones, then getting Jade Warrior Halberds is really worth it. A lot of the enemies that you will be dealing with the exception of Chaos Dwarves, like you look at Cathayan campaigns, the only race that has huge range capability are going to be the Chaos Dwarves. And even then, when you're looking at Chaos Dwarves, unless they have their long-range guns, usually you can get away with using Jade Warrior Halberds. The value proposition is pretty simple. They have armor-piercing weapon damage, and they have a bonus versus large. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same as Jade Warriors. Just better from a defensive standpoint at anchoring a line, spell resistance, charge reflect, charge defense versus large. So if you're starting to deal with lords or even heroes on mounts, these guys can hold the line quite well. Whether or not you want to use formation attack is a discussion. Again, I'm not really a big fan of formation attack. It's useful to hold a line, but if you're looking to deal damage with your melee units, and Jade Warrior Halberds can certainly deal damage, then absolutely. You can, of course, keep using Tiger Warriors at this point, though I would recommend not going with Tiger Warrior Stalkers. I think their value proposition is fairly limited. And then, of course, you have your Jade Warrior Crossbowmen with shields. It's pretty much the same unit, so whether or not it's even worth getting these guys, like for new armies, of course, but for existing ones, replacing your experienced Jade Warrior Crossbowmen with the shielded version is not really a decision I would personally make. Then we have Crane Gunners, your Jezzails, your snipers. They have shield breakers, so they reduce enemy missile block chance. They have armor-piercing weapon damage, and they have 275 range. Now, some of the battlefields, if not a lot of the battlefields, will not let you actually take full advantage of their range capability, but being able to weaken enemy forces before they reach your lines and that shield breaker ability makes them useful in certain situations. But honestly, you can't go wrong with an entire army of Jade Warrior crossbowmen. But if you're looking to snipe an enemy force, they can be useful. In fact, one of the values of long-range sniper units is in getting the enemy force to commit. Because when you're attacking an enemy in a battle, they'll try and make you come to them. And with many Cathay and army compositions, you may just want to adopt a really good defensive position and win with range ability, but you need to get the enemy to commit. There's various ways around that, but having a long-range unit can help with that, though keep in mind, you know, be careful with respect to it. Whether or not you want them depends on the situation, depends on the kind of enemies you're dealing with. I would say I would get them against Lizardmen. Surprisingly, Lustria of all places. Yes, I know, Lustria, shockingly enough. So if you're playing Yanbo, Lustria is pretty decent for range armies in a lot of the battlefields. Like, you would think Lustria would be filled with a bunch of narrow battlefields, but a lot of them are surprisingly open and well-suited to high mobility or long-range armies. Then we have Jade and Jet Lions. So with regards to Jade and Jet Lions, it's essentially the question of what you think is going to provide you the most use. Like, yes, there are some benefits between them. Like, Jet Lions have more melee defense than Jade, and they do have different abilities. So for instance, you have the Jade Lion's Breath over here. So it's a bound spell ability right there. You also get the Jade Conduit, which gives you power recharge benefit. But mostly the benefit here with Jade Lions is that they have magical attacks. So if you're dealing with enemies that have physical resistance, think of Demonettes, for instance, and you know, if you're talking about the Mask or the Kala, then these guys can be good. Then with Jet Lions, it's like they give you projectile, the ability of redirecting projectiles back onto an enemy. Though usually Missile Mirror is, typically speaking, not necessarily the most useful ability. Although you also get Mastery of Elemental Winds here for Jet Lions. So usually speaking, I would say like Jade Lions are the better choice, but Jet Lions do also give reduce physical resistance and silence enemies. So silencing an enemy is a very damn useful skill, and they can also help negate. Oh, I'm guessing that the spell resistance, what the hell was I doing? Yeah, spell resistance was from the Jet Lion. So yeah, that was my mistake right there. But I think both are useful, but neither of them compares to how valuable the Celestial Lion is going to be in combat. Like, if we look at the stats, it doesn't necessarily have the highest level durability in the world, but they do have that flying capability. They have pretty good speed, pretty good melee stats on them. Weirdly enough, they even have Siege Attacker for whatever reason. You know, the Siege Attacker is one of those things that you kind of struggle to make sense. Like, you can also reduce enemy leadership, and yeah, they're just very strong combat. They're good at harassing enemy forces. They're good at dealing with enemy ranged units, enemy artillery. They can hold their own in a front line, so you can, you know, just land them and put them among your Jade Warriors or Tiger Warriors if you're using them. And I would recommend using Tiger Warriors. They're just phenomenal against a lot of early game foes. Again, don't bother with Tiger Warrior Stalkers itself. And then of course your Grand Cannons. With an army like this, by the way, dependent on how many heroes you put in an army like this, dependent on how many range units you want to talk about this, you may not even want Tiger Warriors, but depends on the balance. That's a decision you have to make on a campaign level basis. Like, you're not going to have unlimited hero capacity, so that's one of the factors I would consider there. But yeah, Grand Cannons, the primary purpose is not on an open field battle. It's for sieges, to open walls, to deal with wall towers, your range capability and monster capability, as Cathay can deal with enemies in a siege, but being able to destroy their wall towers is very damn useful. 2 or 3 artillery pieces, cannon artillery pieces, is generally what I go for as the norm when we're talking about pretty much any race in the game. So yeah, great cannons, grand cannons. I would get 3 of them early on. Later on in a campaign, when you got more artillery pieces, you may want to reduce the number of them, or you may just want to go with 2 artillery pieces in general just for the sake of sieges, though that depends on what you're dealing with. Now, for a high-end Cathayan army, we of course should talk about Celestial Dragon Guard and Ironclad Tiger Warriors. So realistically, it's kind of at this point where you're just gonna stop really. Like, by the time you get to tier 5, your campaign should long since be over, or you're fighting across such a long, such territory, such wide expanses of territory that you're considering really upkeep situation as opposed to just the best units possible. The AI usually can't keep up with, can't handle even tier 3 armies, let alone, you know, getting tier 4 armies. So, do you think it's worth it to go out of your way to recruit Celestial Dragon Guard? Especially when you think about it. Building slots are limited, so do you want to improve your economy? Do you want to grow your settlements faster? Do you want to improve your hero capacity? Those are all decisions you have to make in a campaign, because that's kind of the problem with the way Creative Assembly designed things with Celestial Dragon Guard. Obviously, they are a far superior unit to Jade Warrior Halberds. They just do more damage. They have better stats across the board, be it HP, armor, leadership. They have those bronze shields. If they had silver shields, it would be a bit more interesting. But yeah, they do have those bronze shields, expert charge defense, charge reflection as well against enemies. And then we have the Ironclad Tiger Warriors. Like, this is kind of the discussion, really. I usually would not take Celestial Dragon Guard, but when you're playing a Cathayan campaign, you're still gonna get the building for Ironclad Tiger Warriors regardless. And so why not get Ironclad Tiger Warriors, especially because the Sawai, which I forgot to take here, but a Sawai, General of Cathay, can buff these up by a fair amount. And while they don't have the durability of Celestial Dragon Guard, they do better from a combat perspective. They're much faster. They have better damage dealing capability, much better charge capability, and of course they do have Ferocious Ambush. They also have Charge Reflection and Charge Defense versus Large. They don't have Expert Charge Defense, but these guys are really good units. It's just a shame most of the time you won't really get to use them. But yeah, between the two of them, I think it just makes more sense to go for Ironclad Tiger Warriors than Celestial Dragon Guard. That's my view. Outside of that, yeah, you still want to keep some cannons, but let's talk a bit about some of the units that are not really worth bringing. So you have the Wuxing War Compass. Most of the time, or pretty much every single time, this unit is not worth it. Partly because Astromancers can also bring in, like, yeah, Mastery of Elemental Winds is useful, and so are some bout spells, but is it worth throwing on a slot for a buffing unit? And same with the War Drum, by the way. Like, that's also my perspective with the War Drum. Yes, you get some reload skill. Yes, you get melee attack. Yes, you can give units in range armor and all that, but is it worth it to sacrifice that slot? Especially because in quite a few battles, you might only buff a portion of the army, not the whole thing as a whole. I mean, you do have Encourage, but, you know, Cathayan armies already have pretty good leadership. And then we have Fire Rain Rockets, you know, your Hellstorm rocket batteries, if they don't get stopped by trees, which, you know, can be a bit of an issue. But yeah, Hellstorm rocket batteries are always fun, though the ammunition on Fire Rain Rockets is a bit of a disappointment, but that's why we can get Gate Masters who, yeah, in a campaign perspective, they're pretty useful. Let's talk a bit about heroes, of course. Alchemists, you want to get them. Not quite sure how I feel about them being on a Sky Lantern, but all the same, their magical capability, the various buffs they can provide to our army, very useful. And most importantly, I would dare say, is the campaign movement range that alchemists provide. Astromancers, kind of the worst heroes of Cathay. Obviously, they give you magical capability and, you know, get you more items as well in a campaign. Not that with caravans you'll be lacking in items in a Cathay campaign. I think Cathay can get a huge amount of items. Not as much as dwarves can get later on, but certainly pretty good. Gate Masters, their combat capability is not phenomenal. Like, yeah, they're decent as far as a hybrid lord goes, but their main benefit is how they buff an army. And it's not these skills that you're seeing right here. It's the melee defense or reload skill that you can get, the upkeep benefit that they can get in a campaign. And then, of course, we have Claw Speakers, you have Shadow, you have Beasts, and you have Life. Personally, I do prefer them as Life most of the time, or Shadows. Beasts is more situational. You do have a mantra. In Skirmish, it's tied to the type of, to the School of Magic you get, whereas in a campaign, it is the choice you have. Life is nice if, you know, you want to heal up your Celestial Lions or any big single entity, or Lords and Heroes in a campaign. And speaking about Lords and Heroes, there is a consideration to be made with respect to Lord Magistrates. Partly because they buff units up quite a bit, but more importantly, it's the kind of campaign, the skill line benefits that these guys can provide, not just their active combat abilities. Being able to reduce the upkeep of units, you know, giving things ammunition, various other skills is what makes Lord Magistrates useful. Like Shunigans or, you know, the Dragon-Blooded, not quite as much. Sawais, the one reason I would take a Sawai versus Celestial General, the only reason, is if I want to use quite a few Iron Claw warriors. Most of the time, I will still argue that Celestial General is better, especially as they can get the Celestial Lion as a mount, and that's really their value proposition as well as their significant combat skills. But yeah, a Sawai is a alternative if you want to go for it. But this is kind of like a more endgame Cathayan army. Most of the time, though, you're probably not really going to have all of this in a campaign. And then we talk about the high-end units and their value proposition. So for Tier 5, the only units obviously worth talking about are the Skyjunks and Terracotta Sentinel. Otherwise, you're just going to use pretty much everything that you have. Like, Skyjunks have a couple of bombs, and they have an incredible range capability. One of the things to not ignore is the fact that you can, with the insert key, control the rockets or control your aim, which means Skyjunks, when you're dealing with a siege situation in particular as Cathay later on in a campaign, are actually quite good alone at destroying enemy fortifications. And they also have more ammo than fire rain rockets, which is kind of a bit silly. You'd think ground artillery should have more ammo, but all the same, yeah, Skyjunks, pretty damn useful unit, pretty powerful. It's just a shame they're Tier 5. They cost a lot. But, you know, if you get to Tier 5, I would dare say they're worth getting. And then you have Terracotta Sentinels. Pretty powerful in combat, lots of damage dealing capability, lots of resistance. I'm not sure why this one is being buffed quite a bit. Probably because of Yin. Anyway, so my view with Terracotta Sentinels, they're useful, but by the time you damn well get them, you're not necessarily going to need them. There's only a handful of opponents where I would argue using a Terracotta Sentinel. Say what you will about a Rogue Idol. You know, compare this to a Rogue Idol or some other Tier 5 units. Those are expensive. They're slow, they're cumbersome and all that, but, you know, you go up against a Rogue Idol in melee, you will definitely feel it. I just don't think Terracotta Sentinels have that kind of shock and awe factor as some other units do. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're gonna be able to win against pretty much anything, or the vast majority of opponents are gonna go up against, but yeah, I don't necessarily think they're worth going out of your way to recruit, and that's just where I stand. It's mostly, though, to be fair, by the time you even get to tier 4, let alone tier 5, you're mostly recruiting units for the sake of fluff as opposed to actual campaign usage. It's, again, that discussion of, is it worth it from an economic standpoint? Because you can make powerful armies, or you can make more cheaper armies. That's one of the reasons people argue in favor of peasants, but personally I think the upkeep difference between peasants and Jade Warriors is not good enough to justify going with peasants. Whereas with Terracotta Sentinels, well, you know, I can make an army of Terracotta Sentinels, and I can make 3 armies of Jade Warrior crossbowmen with artillery and Jade Warrior Halberdiers for the same price. So, and a lot of the times in the late game, you're not just going to fight one single enemy army, you're going to fight multiple armies, especially with the AI tendency of stacking its forces in the same location. I suppose that's where a lightning strike comes in, but all the same, that's... I find having more units, you know, 40 plus units, better than having 20 really strong units. That's my general perspective. I mean, this is the reason why Skaven are so annoying to deal with in a campaign, from a campaign perspective, because they have just that swarm of forces to throw against you. But that's where I stand. Let me know what you guys think. Costin signing out.